Welcome. I'm going to make some comments on some of the points on some of the slides. The title of this is ChatGPT and Course Writing. My name is Bill Anelli. I'm professor of philosophy at Modesto Junior College. And this is also going to reference some poll results from our presentation that we had today at Modesto Junior College. So here's a slide of a painting that won the Colorado State Fair Fine Arts Competition, and it was done by WALL-E, which is kind of a ChatGPT equivalent, but for visual arts. Here's a question, what do we mean by writing? Are there multiple kinds of writings, and how does that relate to ChatGPT? My approaches in my courses, I think about how students will be different, will be changed by my course. What assessments tell me I'm on track for that. The kinds of in-class and out-of-class assignments that will result in those outcomes. And since I emphasize writing, most philosophy courses do, there's this issue. One way of looking at that is like, how does writing the long paper, where students have to struggle with the blank page, right? How does that change the brain? And the implication is that, if ChatGPT is going to start doing a lot of the heavy lifting of writing papers that used to be done by students, does that mean sort of a different kind of brain development? I don't know. I think more research is needed, and that's something that I kind of want to read up more about. So I mentioned here things I'm not going to cover, and you can just peruse that. Let me explain this. So we can get to a point in the future where students are writing the papers and instructors could use ChatGPT to give feedback on those papers. And so that might, an extreme example of that, it might be ChatGPT kind of reading and talking and engaging with ChatGPT, the two robots, while the rest of us, student and instructors, sit on the sidelines. Some terms to know: training data, it's this vast range of information and data, articles, books, and so forth, that these large language models, for example, ChatGPT, are trained on. And there's a point where that training data, there's a date at which that ends. And right now, I believe it's September 2021. That's important to know when you are thinking about ChatGPT proofing your assignments. Prompt engineering is the question someone puts into their AI box. Okay. This was the poll results, everyone's experience so far with ChatGPT. I went down the rabbit hole. What I'm going to say now about the next few slides about what ChatGPT can and can't do are based in part on this video here by Professor Julia Staffel in philosophy. So what can it do well at a B level? I'll give you a nice list here. Note, it can create first-person, experiential, reflective, personal writing on any topic. It can explain concepts at different grade levels. I think these are important that we know that. It can even summarize articles at different word lengths. You can specify that. It can answer exam or quiz questions if the content is within its training data. Here's a quote. This is not in the scholarship of teaching and learning. This is not in AI scholarship or AI experts per se. But this is got 2 million views. And this is oriented towards students, like how they can use ChatGPT to do lots of things, including writing their papers. So what it can't do well, it cannot answer questions outside of its training data. Hence that date I referred to before in September 2021 is important. That date, by the way, will be changing presumably as we get new versions of ChatGPT. It cannot reliably provide accurate links or references to what it produces. You can ask it to do that. Sometimes it hallucinates these, makes them up. And the implication is then we need to check all those references. This is a kind of, I don't know, might require more time than we did before on checking those. It can't meta-reflect on its own editing process. So if you ask ChatGPT, like, why did it make the editing choices it made when it's revising a draft for you, it can't say why it made those choices. It also can't complete stepwise assignments that expand on earlier work. And so 3 and 4 are important because they imply what we can do to maybe ChatGPT proof our assignments. For example, with 3 and 4, what I will do is maybe have 1 or 2 rough drafts before the final paper. And you can do this with smaller assignments. And then I put comments, detailed, thoughtful comments, on those rough drafts, and then ChatGPT, and then students have to tell me, summarize my comments, and then tell me how they incorporated those comments in their final paper. Okay, so that kind of assignment, right, where what you're including now is students telling a story in a way about the comments you made on the rough draft and how they've incorporated those, and down to what page they incorporated those comments, might be a way to ChatGPT proof your assignment. Here's another quote about how ChatGPT can be used by teachers to grade student work, right? The echo chamber issue I mentioned. And I think the takeaway here is if it does this well, it's still going to be making generic comments. So this slide has to do with the context in which most community colleges and community college instructors give written feedback, detailed written feedback to students. The context is we have large loads, lots of students. And so, given that we can easily spend 30 to 40 hours a week before we get to student papers and work on them, we have limited time for substantial, detailed, thoughtful feedback performed frequently, which is sort of the pedagogical ideal to do that, according to folks like Susan Ambrose, as an example of someone who advocates that. So, a note here, this 5 is important. If you have 120 to 200 students and you spend 10 minutes per week per student on their written work, that would be 25 to 30 hours before you even take a break, right? And that's a bit, it's a lot. So the issue here is ChatGPT can provide instant generalized feedback on writing, so those instructors who, due to time constraints perhaps, offer a similar level of generalized feedback, are they now replaceable in a way, that labor time replaceable by ChatGPT? Something to think about. Okay, so most of the rest of this presentation is on the various positions that instructors and faculty may have regarding ChatGPT. The first is business as usual. I'm just going to click through these for you. Keep in mind that business as usual basically means, yeah, there's ChatGPT, but I'm not changing anything. The adopters are adopting, integrating to some level. They're integrating ChatGPT into their classroom. Or they're ChatGPT proofing their assignments. So there's a poll on these positions, and this is where the participants fell on this poll. Now, let's go into a little more detail with these positions and look at some, I'm going to give a few responses to these. Number one, why business as usual? Because my course is beyond it. Let me explain number three. Number three is just, I have such a great connection with my students that they just will never misuse it. So I don't need to worry. Number two, the idea is that I don't need to change anything because I trust the ChatGPT detectors. So I have some objections, some things to consider regarding 2 and 3. Number 3 here, the MLA guidance is basically if a student uses ChatGPT and then they cite that, the citation contains the prompt that the student used to generate the ChatGPT, which to me is incoherent because the citation is just citing what the citer wrote, right? The other issue is there's no way to go back to the source because every time ChatGPT generates text, it's an original. Now, number 2, some issues here. ChatGPT detectors can be wrong. They assign a less than 100% probability. So what do you do if it says, it's a 68% likelihood that the entire essay or whatever piece of text was generated by ChatGPT? At what level do you, what's your, what's your line here at which you accept or don't accept the work? There's an equity issue where students who have access to more financial resources might purchase AI software that can defeat these detectors. And, if you're doing business as usual and ignoring ChatGPT in your classroom, don't we have a duty to prepare them for this new AI landscape and world where professionals are using ChatGPT for certain kinds of writing? For example, medicine is an example where it's probably going to be used a lot. And finally, if the ChatGPT detector says that the student misused it, plagiarized, etc., you might be involved in lots of email exchanges with students. So that's another objection, maybe. Now let's look at the positions regarding adopters. So neutral, reluctant, enthusiastic, adopter positions. The first is number 5, ChatGPT proofing my assignments. Now, this isn't exactly adopting ChatGPT, but what is happening is that often that means you're changing your assignments because of ChatGPT. So it's maybe I'm reading that as a kind of like adopting ChatGPT in that indirect way. Next is more direct. You're integrating ChatGPT directly into your assignments. Like part of your assignments will be using ChatGPT. You'll be directing students to do that. And then this other position is, which I won't comment on, is you're just trying stuff out. Okay, I'm going to unfold the slides for you and then make some comments. Right? Strong and weak model. Notice in the weak model, the student does all the writing and ChatGPT does the editing. That's the weak model. That weak doesn't mean it's worse. It just means you're weakly integrating. And the strong is the opposite of that. One caveat here is I intentionally make this kind of two extremes that are reversed for the sake of clarity, so that when we have conversations about our different positions, we can kind of map out where we agree and disagree. This is not meant to be taken as the only two ways of integrating these. I personally, if these are our choices, I am quite concerned about the strong model and maybe opposed to that at this point, in favor of the weak model over that. Or maybe ChatGPT proofing. And so my objection to the strong model is the orchestra analogy, which again, let's take a look at that. It may not be accurate, but it's something that's kind of fun to play with. I.e., can you say why it's not accurate, right? And here it is. So the idea here with the analogy is I took piano lessons for 10 years and then accompanied the middle school choir at one point. So I have some rudimentary understanding of music, and imagine that I was then asked to conduct a Modesto symphony. I could do some things, right? I could point to the horns and the strings. Maybe anybody could, and move my hands in some rhythmic way that would kind of work. But it certainly wouldn't be the same as an actual conductor doing that. So is this a fair analogy to writing in the strong model, where the student doesn't have those college level skills developed yet in terms of writing, compositional writing, argumentation, all of that, and suddenly all they're doing is editing what ChatGPT does? Can they really do a sufficient level, a fine level, a skill of editing? Can they really pull that off? And we did a poll. And here's the poll. And that wraps up this presentation. Thank you for watching. Please email me if you have any questions, suggestions, edits, objections. It's all fine. Caveat, please be skeptical of journalists writing on AI, and instead try to include in your reading on AI expert scholarship. And maybe avoid these fallacies. I didn't get into the fallacies in the presentation today. The Luddite fallacy simply says that the Luddites destroyed the machines in the Industrial Revolution. So the Luddite fallacy says every time we've had disruptive technology, starting in the 1750s with the steam engine and moving forward, things have always improved. It's created more jobs and more growth and a better quality of life. And those who always were screaming doom and gloom about every disruptive technology, in every single case they were wrong. Therefore, the future will continue the way the past does. Now, assuming that's true, and I'm bracketing that, it may not be true, what I just said, but if it's true, it doesn't mean the future will be like the past, right? So maybe in this case, ChatGPT isn't a good thing for society. The false calculator analogy just says, hey, at one time we had to to do all our multiplication, division, and mathematical operations by hand. And then calculators came along, and we're all the better for it. And ChatGPT is the equivalent. And I don't think that's a fair analogy either. And you'll hear both of these when you start doing a lot of reading on AI. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for listening.